Okay, so we've made our big old ocean, and now it's time for the magic, which is putting the fluid simulation in and making it conform to the ocean surface that we have here. Apologies if my voice is a little bit hard to understand right now. I have a little bit of a cold. So I'm going to, excuse me, add in a cube. All right, and I'm just going to press M, move this to a new collection, and call it the fluid sim. Enter. And now I'm going to turn everything right here off, just to make it a little bit easier so I can actually see what I'm doing. All right, so here's my cube. I'm going to press the N key. Come over here. Here's my dimensions. So I want a pretty big one. So I'm just going to go 100 meters by 100 meters. And then for the height, 20. Let me turn this back on right quick. Make sure that this is, I might have some splashes that are hitting the top of the domain, so double that to 40 just to make sure. Essentially, you can have this height anywhere you want it to be, but depending on how you set up your ocean, you always want to make sure that the lowest point of the fluid sim itself never goes below the domain floor. And also, you have to keep in mind, like, are you having an object in the sky come down and slam into the ocean, which is going to make a lot of ripples? If so, you're going to have a lot of splashes, and those splashes may be hitting the top of your domain box. So you always have to keep that in mind. I'm just going to have something simple, which is probably either a ship moving side to side, making a wake, or probably something even simpler, which is just an object coming up out of the ocean surface. So there's that. So I'm just going to use 100 meters by 100 by 40. So duplicate with Shift D, hit enter. Change my pivot point to 3D cursor with this little drop down 3D cursor. Make sure that your 3D cursor is on the world origin. If it's not, let me turn this off because I'm through looking at that. You can Shift S, cursor to world origin, and then change it to 3D cursor. Your 3D cursor is this little checkerboard thing. Like if you click anywhere in the world whatsoever, you can see the little crosshair moves, and that's the 3D cursor. So if you were to add in a new object, it always gets added in directly where the 3D cursor is. So cursor to world origin. Excuse me. All right. Select the cube of the duplicate, which is, let me just go ahead and call this fluid domain, and this will be fluid. So on the fluid object itself, I'm going to deselect all of that, select just the top face, scale Z 0, and that basically just brought the top face down to the level of the 3D cursor, because you don't want to fill the entire domain up with water or fluid, oil, honey, whatever fluid you're using. So this little orange section right here is going to be your fluid. Everything up here is going to be air. And next, I need my collision object. So let me come back to frame 1, because I'm going to have to animate the collision object. Yeah, let's just do a simple little moving up object. I don't want to use the monkey. Just do a cube. Gonna have to scale it way up. That's good. And I'm just gonna keep it as simple as possible. All right. Location. Make sure you're on keyframe 1. And come over all the way to keyframe 240, which is the final keyframe. And I'm just gonna move it up. And just to have a little bit of fun, turn that back to bounding box center, my pivot point. Make it rotate while it's moving up. Go back to frame 1. Yeah. So Alt R and location rotation. So now if I play this back, yeah, it rotates as it moves up. So that way you should get some splashes and stuff. Now we get to add the physics in. So I'm just going to call this, oh, let me move this to the fluid sim and call this the effector. I try to keep everything as labeled as possible because it really does help when you start having the fluid. And this is going to be my flow type to liquid behavior. Yeah, leave that on geometry. I'm not going to mess with the velocity at all because it's not moving. I don't want it to be pouring in from one direction or another. I just want it stationary. Flow source from the mesh. So yeah, there's that. And then finally, fluid domain. Domain type to liquid. And before I do anything else, let me preach at you for a second, because I see a lot of people doing fluid simulations on my Discord in the past, and they always have problems with it. Whenever you notice that you add in a fluid property, or it doesn't even have to be fluid, you can do gas as well, gas or liquid. You'll notice that your domain, which is the boundary box of your simulation, all of the simulation happens inside of the boundary box or the domain. You'll notice whenever you apply or add one in that you get a little small cube in one specific corner. It's always in the bottom. But the main thing that you always want to remember is keep your effector, which in this case is this cube, keep it larger than the size of this. So if this was a sphere or a triangle right here, you want to make sure that whatever you're doing, it's larger than this. I have no idea why it needs to be that way, but Blender will basically treat this effector right here as if it doesn't exist. If it's smaller than this little small cube here, it'll just act like it doesn't even exist. It will lead to all sorts of problems, like the effector not messing with the smoke or the flames or the water. It could do stuff like messing up the scale. It could make the ocean waves seem too big or too small, or it could make the smoke simulation, the fire simulation, just look way out of scale. So if you're ever doing anything with physics whatsoever in Blender, fluid simulation wise or smoke simulation wise, and you're finding that it's not quite right, the number one thing that I always suggest people do is if you have moved anything whatsoever, like scale wise, you always select your objects, Control A, apply the scale. So I'm just going to undo that because I hadn't messed with it. But apply the scale and then make sure that your effector object is always larger than this small little voxel. I think that's what this thing is down here. It's like a voxel. Otherwise, Blender will just make you cry. Okay. For the sake of not wanting to wait for multiple hours for this thing to render, or bake out, not render, I'm going to leave this on 32. Most of the time, I will go ahead and tell you, I set it on 100. Usually when I am happy with the result that I have on 100, I use this for basically just playing around inside of Blender itself. But when I'm ready to render something for a video, usually I will bump this up to 200, which is going to take a long time to bake out. Yeah, it's taken forever just to load those settings. God, my throat. It's taking forever just to load those settings in. So I'm just so that it happens very quickly and I don't have to spend all day waiting for this bake to happen, I'm going to leave this on 32. So don't get upset and surprised that the quality of the fluid looks like a bunch of goop. This is why. I'm leaving it intentionally on 32 just so that I can try and hurry this up. I will go through and bake this out at a higher resolution once I've finished everything, just to show you what it looks like. So, I'm not going to use flip fluids just because I know not everyone can afford flip fluids, even though it's not that expensive. And just kind of help people out. Viscosity, I'm going to turn on. Diffusion, shouldn't have to mess with that. I mean, you can if you want to, but the base settings are water anyway. Particles. I do want foam, so I'm going to turn that on. Wait a minute. Let me see something right here. Particles in the boundary. Yeah. And particles that leave the domain box, I do want them to be deleted, so I'm glad that that is a default setting. And turn on mesh. So now I can hide this, hide that. Where's my effector? Oh, there it is, way down there. Upres. I'm not going to tweak any of these because, again, I'm trying to make it go very quickly. And that should be it. So I'm just going to do / fluid domain bake. I'm going to set this on to 40 as the end frame. I don't know why, but ever since Blender 2.8, you actually have to change it from replay to all as a type before it allows you to bake. But that's pretty much it. I'm going to hit bake and then I'll be back when it's done. All right, finally just got finished. Didn't take too long. It's on 32. So I want to come back over here for a minute. Select my ocean proxy, which is this huge piece of ocean. And I'm just going to turn all of these modifier visibilities off right now to try and boost my performance. And then go ahead and hide that collection again. And let me just rename this to ocean. All right, so now I should be able to play this back, and it still lags like crazy. Okay, so I'm not seeing a whole lot of disturbance, even though my effector is moving and moving. Let me come into side view here. Yeah. So let's investigate. Stop the playback. Let me come down here, free the bake. Make sure that everything is set up. Flow, liquid, geometry, good. Effector, collision. That's my problem right there. I'm an idiot. So on your effector, fluid effector, not collision. I apologize. So let me rebake this and then I will be right back. All right, I'm back. And I can already tell things are going well just by the fact that I now have deformation on the fluid. So let me just play this back and stop it for a second. If you do have any sort of lag, I mean, you're going to have lag. This isn't a magical fix-all problem, but if you have a lot of lag, you can click on playback, and the default is play every frame, but if you turn it on frame dropping, it should help you out a little bit. Nice. It looks like goop. That's because I'm using a resolution of 32. I usually use about 100, and then for my final render, I typically use about 150 or 200. But for this tutorial, doing it semi-quickly, it's all right. Now, object with the domain, you basically aren't going to be using this fluid object anymore. It's basically just there to tell the domain where to generate the fluid. So you can turn off the visibility and click the little camera icon, make sure it has an X on it, and that way it doesn't render at all. Everything else that we're going to be doing is going to be focusing on the fluid domain itself. So I'm just going to come up to object, shade smooth, so that we don't have as much blockiness going on. It's still going to look goopy, but it won't be ugly goopy. So now I can turn this back on so I can see what I'm working with here. Let me select my ocean, come back over here, turn all of these back on because I need to see them, but I'm going to leave the subdivision off for now. Just for now. But right now I need the other window open, my full window. Okay, so come up here to edit, preferences, add-ons, and copy. Yeah. Make sure that you turn on copy attributes menu for this next thing to work. Just select the checkbox, hit refresh. You don't even have to restart the file, and you should be good to go. All right, let me turn that other window off. All right, excuse me. So now, with that add-on installed, you want to select the fluid, shift select the plane, copy, and then choose copy selected modifiers. So where's it at? Copy. There we go. Copy selected modifiers. And I'm going to try hold down the shift key and select everything but the subdivision. And I think that's what messed it up last time. Yep, that's what messed it up last time. As long as I don't get a box again, it's working correctly. All right, So now select my Mount Everest of fluids. Again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm just going to call them group 1, group 2, group 3, group 4, and group 5. Come back over to the modifiers panel. I'm not going to be messing with the fluid or the liquid and the foam particles right now, because that's one of the last things I'll be doing. Right now, I want to focus on all of these. And I think by the end of this tutorial, there's going to be somewhere around 20 modifiers just on this one object here. So I have a lot to go through with you guys. Let me make sure that the displace direction is set to Z. It is. Good job. Z. Good job. Nice. And on the plane. Plane. Good. That's what messed me up when I was going through all of this before recording this tutorial. It wasn't set to Z. All right. Come into top view with numpad 7. Want to add in a plane. Let me just click this. That whenever you have a collection selected up here, Blender will automatically add new objects into that into that collection instead of just randomly plopping them over here. So want to add it into the Fluid Sim collection. I'm going to come into wireframe view with Z, Shift A, add a plane, and I'm going to scale this not quite the size of the Fluid Sim, but close. I would say about there. Control A to apply the scale always. And now I'm going to select my ocean plane. Add in a third vertex group to the ocean. Name it group 3. Actually, because there's so many vertex groups going on, I'm going to make this a lot easier for you guys. You don't have to change anything that you've already set up on these modifiers. I'm just going to rename these ocean group 1 and so on. You don't have to do this, but it does make it a little bit easier to remember what you're doing. And so on with this, I'm going to do fluid and fluid group 2. There we go. That way, when you're switching between objects and you're looking at all of these modifiers, whenever you see something that's, what's going on here? And then you read the name, it's a lot easier to remember instead of just group 1 or group.001, because that's going to be the default for both of these. It helps to differentiate between which one you're actually working on. So just trying to help you guys out in the future, because believe me, it's going to get very confusing. Now, modifiers. Yeah. Wait, let me make sure. So I was wrong. Just change this ocean group 1, ocean group 2, group 1. Believe me when I say that this is going to save you a lot of frustration. And group 2. All right. Excuse me. These vertex weight edits are going to be your bread and butter for like the next however long it takes me to record this tutorial. There's going to be so many of them. And essentially what they're doing, if I come into weight paint mode, so the red is, it'll actually, well, no, I'm not going to do that. The red is what is actually being affected the most. Yellow, not so much. Green, even less than that. And then blue is nothing. So what these vertex weight edit modifiers are doing is it is editing the vertex group. And your settings, however you set them up in here, is telling Blender what to do. The vertex weight proximity modifiers are taking the difference between the vertex weight edit and the actual object and then mixing them. If you think of it as a shader editor, this is like your mix node, the weight proximities. So you're blending whatever the vertex weight edit modifier is doing with the actual object, and you're blending it with this proximity. And you're going to have to keep doing that over and over and over and over and over again. So at least that's my understanding of how these things work. The tutorials that I watched and gleaned information from didn't really explain super in depth. They were basically just telling you what to click, which is sort of what I've been doing. But I'm trying to explain it a little bit more. All right. We delete these because they don't actually need to be there. I accidentally added them in. Change that to object 3, or vertex group 3, sorry. And this, set that to plane. And vertex group 3. Okay. I accidentally duplicated those by adding new ones in. And now I'm going to add a shrink wrap modifier. Where's it at? There it is. I want my target to be the fluid domain. Fluid domain. There we go. Vertex group to the third vertex group. Wrap method to project. Good. I want it on the Z axis because that's the up and down. I'm not worried about the side to sides. And I want to cull the back faces. And I have a feeling that I'm also going to have to do this. Yeah. So I'm just going to select negative and positive for the moment. I might turn that off in the future. All right. And now come back to frame 1. This is going to be laggy. But if I can just scroll through the timeline. Yeah. Working for the moment. Whether it continues to work, we shall see. And the reason this is so big is the displace modifier. This is on group 1. This should be group 2. I don't know why when I copied these over they didn't work. But it's alright. Doesn't take much to fix them. You just have to, I'm having to scroll through my notes and figure out which one I need to plug into which. So this is group 3. That is also group 3. Let me turn these strengths down on the displacement. Yeah, much better. So instead of having a strength of 2, turn them way, way down. And that should help. No more mountainous waves. Make sure everything is working pretty much how I need it to. Good. So come back to frame 1. The next thing is to try and blend this in as much as possible. It's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be seamless. I'm sure that there is a way to do it. I have not figured it out. Mostly because I've had to learn from cobbling together tutorials, but maybe someone who already knows how to do these can realize what needs to be done if they watch this and fix it. But you are going to be able to see a little bit of the seam. It's never going to go away. And again, the more splashing you have, the more waves are going to come up to the edge of your domain, and then they're going to splash up the sides of the domain. You're going to see those splashes. You're never going to be able to make them go away. Not without a lot of Boolean modifying and masking and stuff. But then if you do that, you don't have any splashes in the center either. So I want to hide this for the moment, my fluid domain, and turn on the fluid itself. The thing that I said you're not going to be using. Well, guess what? We're going to be using it. I want to duplicate it, hit enter, and come over to the physics tab, delete the fluid physics from the duplicated one. Okay. And I'm just going to call this the edge mask. Edge mask. Actually, it might help, if I name it correctly. All right. Cool. Make sure I'm in face select mode. I want to select the bottom, delete vertices. Okay, might help if I could just get rid of that up there. And select the top, delete only faces. And I can turn the fluid off as well. Now, come over into Vertex Select, hit A to select everything, turn my fluid domain back on, come into side view, and here's going to be the problem. I have a lot of splashing going on, so let me come over to frame 240. And I'm just going to extrude this up a little bit. I'm not worrying about all of these splashes here. I'm just trying to see the sort of wave deformation. How tall does it get? And I want this to be at least as tall, if not just a slightly little bit higher than the height of the largest wave. So, and see, I need to come up a little bit. And you're just going to have to scroll through your animation. So I'm just going to have to do that now. And again, this is actually the effector making this happen, so don't worry about that. Or I'm not going to worry about it. You might have to, because you might, again, have a very choppy ocean. All right, so far so good. really interested to see what this looks like. When I was making the tutorial itself and writing down my notes on how to do this, I basically made a ship animation and then made a even more basic cube animation where a cube literally just lifted from the surface of the ocean. All right. It looks like that is high enough, actually, right there. It's touching, so I want to move it up just a little bit. Okay. And, whoa, what happened there? I think the fluid bake got corrupted or something. It doesn't matter because I'm going to be rebaking it at a higher resolution for the final little bit of the tutorial. So, I'm good. Tab out of edit mode, get out of wireframe mode, and now I have basically this little thing here. And this is going to try and help me to blend this edge in with the ocean. All right, so I want to scale this to where it is roughly the size of the fluid domain. So scale shift Z, and I want to move this down to where it's roughly about the same size, just slightly larger than the fluid domain. Cool. And then as always, Control A, apply the scale. Excuse me. Okay. Come back to the fluid domain itself. I'm going to leave this off for now. Okay. Move this VertexWeight proximity. And now I can set the target to the edge mask. And now I might actually be able to see what's going on. New Blender still doesn't want to cooperate. So let me turn my thing on. I can go ahead and hide the edge mask. And I'm going to have to play around with this. I'm going to use my other setting that I had for my notes and just put this to 8 and 1. Fall off to smooth. Did I use smooth? Yeah, I used smooth. Turn off the plane as well. All right. Select my ocean. And Shift D to duplicate it. Hit enter. And this is going to be Ocean Proxy 2. Okay. I want to delete the shrink wrap modifier from the second proxy. And the two vertex weight modifiers right here, delete them as well. And come over here and delete my third vertex group. And I don't want this to render, so I can turn this little camera icon off. And now I can hide this. Now, shrink wrap modifier to the fluid domain. And we're going to try and shrink wrap the fluid, which is the ocean plane is already being shrink wrapped to the fluid domain. And now we're going to shrink wrap the fluid domain to the second invisible proxy ocean in order to try and make this as smooth as possible. Okay. So this is going to be ocean proxy 2. And everything just went away. Don't worry about it. We'll fix it in a second. Vertex group to the third. Okay. And now you can see, if I come into side view, everything is being bent down towards the ocean surface. That's what we want to see. This is what I mean by saying that it's not a perfect thing. It's not quite on 3ds Max, Houdini, Maya, their fluid simulations yet, because you're always going to be able to see where the edge of the domain is. You can get around that by just making a ridiculously huge domain and then positioning your camera in such a way where you can't see the edge of the domain. You're always going to be able to see it if you have like an aerial shot. But hey, free software, what can you complain about? All right, that the wrap method to project, that just kind of spreads it out. But I want the axis to be on the z-axis, and then negative and positive. And that helped to smooth it out a little bit more. I don't want to call the back faces correct. No, definitely not the front faces. I might come back and select this later. Depends. It all depends. Whatever the best setting is, that's what you need to use. But for now, I'm going to leave it off. It does look like I'm going to come back and turn this on, though. Oh, so now we've added in a fluid domain. We have baked out the simulation. We have conformed the top of the mesh to the ocean. We've created a second ocean proxy, which hopefully doesn't kill your computer, and then shrink wrapped the fluid domain to the second proxy to where it is a somewhat semi-seamless simulation. But you could technically stop here and you're good to go. But the problem is, I'm not going to be able to show you because this is so globular and goopy. But if I play this, yeah, you can see the ocean is working how we want it to. But if you have a lot of movement going on, a lot of churning and stuff like that, everything, if I come inside of you, the entire fluid simulation is being affected right now. And the only thing you really want to be affected is this small area here. That's it. You don't want anything up here, any of your splashes being affected and deformed by the shrink wrap modifier. Yeah, that was a real good example right there. You see how this, instead of being rounded, is flattening out? If I scroll through, you see how it's being flattened out? That's the shrink wrap modifier. So it's actually flattening out the fluid. All of this under here, it's trying to flatten it, but it can't because it's up against the fluid domain, and everything up here. But you only want basically this to be affected. So that's what we have to work on next. I mean, you could technically render this out and it would look all right, but we want it to look better. So this is where the fourth vertex group comes in. And you guessed it, even more modifiers. So I'm going to come make sure my cursor is selected to world origin. I'm going to make sure I'm in the right collection that this is getting added into. Add a plane. I'm going to call this surface deform. Enter. Enter. Come on, keyboard. You can do it. And I want to scale this to where it is slightly larger than the domain. That's about good. Control A to apply the scale. Now, I want to, just for the moment, turn off the fluid, go back to frame 1. Okay. And turn on my snap. You can also do it with Shift Tab. Just make sure this little magnet is highlighted in blue. Come down in the drop-down menu, select Face. Okay. And then I'm going to click Center. And I'm going to press G, Z, and then hit Enter. And what that did is basically move the plane that we just added directly centered with the face of the fluid sim. So if you come and look kind of, well, there's waves, so you can't really see, but you get the idea. It's now sort of the center of it, at least, is occupying the same space as the center of the fluid. So that's what we want. So I'm going to turn this snap to off. Come back to the fluid domain. Add in a new VertexWeight edit modifier. Fluid group 4 as my vertex group. Default weight set to 1. Turn on group add. And then the second VertexWeight proximity modifier. Again, group. And then I'm going to select the plane, the surface deform plane. And I want to move this, which is the VertexWeight edit that we just added in. I want to move it above the displace, the 2 displace modifiers. Select this one and drag it right there to where they're above the displace modifiers. According to my notes, set the lowest to 2 and the highest to 0.5. Proximity mode, geometry, face. Okay. And I'm going to turn off the visibility and the render because I don't want it to render that plane at all. Then I want to add a VertexWeight mix modifier. Move that away. Drag it above the displace. Okay. And for vertex group A, I'm going to set that to the first vertex group. And then for vertex group B, I'm going to mix it with the 4th vertex group. I'm going to set the mix mode to multiply. And then I'm going to duplicate it. And I can get rid of that one. And now on the duplicated VertexWeight mix, I know it gets confusing. I'm trying to go as slow as possible for you guys. Believe me, it's confusing. And I want to do a mix, change vertex group A to group 2. And that should be all you have to do right there. And now, if you come over, and it's still not working. It worked in the other file. It's probably something to do with me messing something up somewhere. As far as what I did beforehand was I did all of this in a separate file. When I was working on this on my own, I was doing all of this in a separate file, and then I just appended the fluid domain in here. And that's probably what it is. Me trying to do this with this huge ocean is probably Blender's way of telling me, please stop. So, you could, let me save this, Control save, good. Let me switch over into view, and you could render this right now, and it'd be totally fine, with the exception of one thing. With the fluid domain selected, come over to the materials, and just click ocean. And there you go. Come back to my modifiers property. Now, you could render this right now and it wouldn't be too bad. But for those of you, and I understand that not everyone has, you know, a high-end graphics card, a high-end CPU, and your main problem is going to be all of this stuff, which you aren't actually seeing, but you're still having to calculate and render. So in order to save a little bit of time and a lot of pain on your computer end, you can disable this with a mask. Now, if you don't want to have to go through the trouble of setting up even more modifiers, because that's what it's going to take, you can render this out and it'll be fine. But if your computer starts screaming, you're going to have to set this up. So I'm just going to go ahead and show you what to do, and hopefully that'll save you and your computer a bunch of pain. So I'm going to get out of this. Add in another plane. Cursor to world origin, just in case. Plane. And I'm going to make this called my domain mask, because it's going to be eliminating all of the unneeded geometry that I don't want. And again, scale it to where it's slightly larger than the fluid domain. Doesn't have to be a specific size, just, you know, about that big. Control A, apply the scale. And I want to move this down below the fluid domain. About right there. Okay. Just to be on the safe side, I'm also going to move it below the effector. My effector actually starts out below the fluid domain, so I'm going to include it just in case. You might not have to, because you might be working on an entirely different setup with your ocean. So, just gonna come into side view right quick. Now, with the fluid domain selected, add in yet another VertexWeight edit. And this is going to be the 5th vertex group. Good. Default weight to 1. Group add, turn on. And then I can minimize that. And then I want a VertexWeight proximity modifier. Again, vertex group to the 5th. And I want the domain mask to be the target. I want the proximity mode to be geometry. Face. Fall off type, I want it to be sharp, which median step is about the sharpest thing that you have access to at the moment. I'm going to come back to this, but add the modifier in and add the actual mask modifier. 5th vertex group. Okay, and now I should be able to adjust this and actually see. Yeah, there we go. So I want to make this go up. And I'm going to have to come into wireframe view. And again, you're just going to have to roll through your animation. And what we were doing with the highest point of the waves, now your only concern is the lowest point of the waves. So I'm just going to scroll through. And luckily, I don't have too much choppiness going on. I have a relatively smooth ocean, which means I get to cull a lot of stuff with the mask. You can do it. Come on, computer. Yeah, see, right now, this is the lowest wave point that I have ever seen so far. I'm trying to keep an eye on what would be the lowest point. Whoop, went a little bit lower. All right, a little bit lower there. So I think that's it. I think that's going to be the lowest point. So I'm just going to keep playing with this until it gets up to just under that. And there we go. My setting was 28. Yours will be different depending on the turbulence of your ocean. But now you don't have to worry about wasting all of your computer resources on rendering all of the stuff that's down here when you basically are only looking at the top of it. So it's saving your computer some time and frustration. So I'm just going to play through this just to make sure that I'm not getting any masking effects on the top. Cool. Make sure it's not not masking anything on the sides. Yep, it seems good. All right. So you are done. That is how you combine a fluid simulation with a huge ocean plane. And if I'm not mistaken, I do have my camera in here. Yeah, I do. I have a camera. So I'm going to just rotate this. Move it down. Oh, it takes forever. There we go. Rotate it to where it's semi-focused on that. And by the way, this is another little trick that I learned. Not only if you're looking at any point and you're like, oh, so let me turn this on. And yeah, so that was a similar angle to what I want to use, but I don't want to see the ground in the background. I just want it to look like this. So maybe like that. If you're in the viewport, Control Alt Numpad 0, and that moves the camera to where you are. But if you keep zooming in and out and you want to try and maximize your view, if you hit the home button while in camera view, it brings you to where the entire viewport fills up the camera, and then you don't have to worry about anything. So if you want to render this in Eevee, you can. I would suggest, turning on all the settings, screen refraction, turn off half res trace. That's the big one. But if you want to use cycles, I'm going to change this to GPU, turn on adaptive sampling. I'm going to do render region. I'm going to zoom out just so that if you haven't ever used this before, I will demonstrate it for you. And hopefully this doesn't kill the recording. So whenever you're in render region view and you're in camera view, it only renders what is inside the camera. So that way it's not trying to render your entire scene. It's a way of trying to help your computer out. So that's the difference right there between what it's going to look like in Eevee versus what it's going to look like in Cycles. This is pretty much what you're going to get with Eevee, and this is Cycles. You can change the color of the material. You can, again, with the transparent nodes in the material settings, you can turn the foam on, off. I know that Blender's foam is not the most beautiful thing in the world. And you can hopefully select the ocean and move this up like this and try and make it as seamless as possible. So yeah, even then, like I said, it's always going to be somewhat visible. Like this is pretty seamless right here and back here. But the more splashing you have going on with your scene, I'm surprised it's actually rendering this. Jesus, that's a huge ocean. All right, back to this. There's the more splashing you have, you're always going to be able to see somewhat the edge. In all of my tweaking of these modifiers, I have yet to be able to truly eliminate the seam. This is moving the ocean plane back down to an elevation of 0. And as you can see, it's visible on all sides. So I can move it up to try and minimize that. But even then, you're still going to be able to see it. Yeah. So let me get out of this grainy view. So now it's seamless up here, but depending on your lighting and shadows, you can see that the ocean is actually starting to dip down right here. So that's the limitations of it. I'm just going to Alt-G to move the ocean plane back to where it was at an elevation of 0. And I am going to select my fluid, actually Control Save to save everything. And like I said, I'm going to come over to my physics. I'm going to free the bake. I'm going to change the resolution up to, let's just say 100. And then I'll come back and show you what it looks like with not as goopy looking of a fluid simulation. So let me bake this and then I'll be right back. One quick thing, my fluid bake just finished out and it actually helped with the seam somewhat. But one thing that I did forget to go over, which many people will probably already know, but those that don't really do, fluid sims all that much may not know about, you actually need to set your foam particles. So what I like to do is, here is my camera, this small teeny tiny little object. I'm going to cursor to selected, and I'm going to Shift A, add in a UV sphere. And there we go. And I'm just going to come into top view. Oh, we're over here. All right. Well, I'm going to drag it back behind the camera so that, you know, can't be seen. I'm going to give this a material, and I'm not even going to mess with it. I'm just going to leave it base white color. Come over here to my fluid domain, and this is actually going to be the foam particles. So particle settings, which is this little ray gun looking thing. I don't know. Click on foam, and in the render, change render as to object, and then instance object, select the sphere. And you will have a lot of lag as soon as that comes in. But if I zoom in, now you can see little foam particles. And if you want them to be bigger or smaller, let me change the scale to 1. Good. And select the sphere. I'm going to object, shade smooth. That'll smooth them out. But if you want them to be bigger, smaller, instead of messing around with the scale like I just did in the physics panel, I just turned it to 1. And with the sphere selected, I'm just going to press S and scale it down by 0.5 and hit enter. And that's still a bit too big, so scale 0.5, enter. Getting close, scale 0.5, enter. And there we go. And now if I turn my preview mode on, you have foam particles. And I do believe, yeah, there's a scale randomness as well. So if you want to set this to 1, or I'm going to do 0.8, now they have variations in size. They're not all the same size. They will vary. And I'm sorry I didn't add that in beforehand, but you know, I was just excited to get this done. So I am going to render this out, show you what it looks like. I wound up using a fluid resolution of 100 just because I started doing 200 and it seemed that it was probably going to take about 3 hours to bake out, and I just don't have that long to wait today. I have other stuff to do. So I'm going to render this out and then show it to you, and maybe another animation that I have already done, and then I'm going to call it quits. So thank you guys for watching. If you like the tutorial, like the video, comment, subscribe, helps the channel out. And I will see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.